Yeah, it's always fun when I'm doing the DJ work to see my guests getting into the groove. Rowan, welcome aboard for Bucky's fifth quarter. Uh, I'm going to skip all the intro stuff here because
So you're
everyone knows
getting
who I
into the
am.
groove to just kill the mood?
Yeah,
Damn.
pretty much. Well, let's be clear here. A letter from the current director of athletics killed the mood, but we'll get into that in a second here. But everyone, welcome aboard the Scary Alvarez podcast. I always appreciate you coming on. Throw us a like and a subscription. We're building the community up here pretty solidly lately, and that means there's more shows. And fortunately or unfortunately, there is a lot of information, news, and content to cover. And one of these days, it's going to be a show on Wisconsin basketball, talking about something positive and happy, Wisconsin hockey or volleyball. But today, we are going to be mining the Wisconsin football situation to set the scene. I'm sure anyone who's listening to this already knows this. AD Chris McIntosh did a Dear Badger Nation letter this morning, and that letter, I did a sort of cut version of it on Twitter if you're into that sort of thing. It's like 3 lines, but the upshot is we're staying the course. We need a lot more money to do what we think we need to do. Apparently, they're just discovering this on October 20th of 2025, 3 years into Fickell's tenure. And thank you for your support. And Rowan, who's joining us for Bucky's fifth quarter, we're going to explore what this might mean. I have a few different ideas about where McIntosh might be coming from, and just kind of break it down a little bit to make it more digestible for the average Wisconsin fan. So, hey, Rowan, welcome aboard.
Hey, glad to have you, and definitely, definitely a day of news today, and one that set Twitter in a frenzy. We've seen a couple of those recently. Today was one of those days.
Yeah, and before we get going into the brass tacks of this, and anyone can look online and see what this is. Just go to my account or Rowan's account or anywhere. Um, is I can safely say this is not a statistically valid survey in terms of this isn't a double-blind placebo-controlled study. But I can tell you that McIntosh's letter is being met with, I would say, roughly 97% negative from Wisconsin fans and 3% positive, and that 3% may just be Mac burners or Fick burners at this point. If the idea was, and again, we're going to get into this right in a few here, if the idea was to calm down the Wisconsin fan base, who has a little bit of a Fire Fickell bloodlust going on right now, this letter unequivocally did not do that, and if anything, has poured propane on the fire. Is that a fair analysis?
Well, at the moment, I don't know what you can do apart from, I don't know what you can do right now to appease the fan base, and clearly this was not something that appeased the fan base. I don't think that this was even something for the fan base, even though it was a direct letter to them. It's more so publicly sharing your support for Coach Fickell and saying that the Badgers want to become or want to invest more into the program, which was a report that circulated around this weekend before this official statement. The plan was for Luke Fickell to return in 2026, which this letter kind of hints at, and also for Wisconsin to put more money into the football program to support the roster and the coaching staff, which this letter also kind of talks about. So you're starting to see, this kind of now come out publicly, obviously, from Chris McIntosh. And yeah, I mean, right now, I don't know if fans are have a reason to be happy because you haven't seen the results that you want. And you've seen a lot of the reaction online, and it's not positive right now.
Yeah, I think you're being honest, but you're probably understating it to be diplomatic. And the first thing that popped into my mind when I read this, and I mentioned to you off camera that I read it a couple times to make sure I didn't miss anything before then I could do my distillation. Um, this is, in my opinion, this whole situation a classic sunk cost fallacy. And for those of you who don't know, this is an economic theory where you basically throw bad money, good money after bad, and just kind of get the cycle going. You have tried something that is clearly not working, and you continue to try to make something that clearly is not working work to justify the fact that you try to make it work in the first place. And boy, oh boy, that is pretty tough to see. I'm going to go through three interpretations of this letter from the perspective of the chancellor, from McIntosh, the people inside those ivory towers, and it has to be one of these three things. I think, as far as the intent of what they're doing, the first one is, and I think this is probably the least likely, is simply we think we can manage this. We need a little more money, or maybe a lot more money. We don't plan to fire him. We're not going to say that because people will get really mad and storm the castle, but this is our guy. We feel pretty clear about it, and he needs more money to make this work. That's the first one. I'm going to go through all three of these. The second was they probably know they need to move on from this guy unless something really turns around this season, which I don't think it's going to. There's no reason to believe it will. But in the meantime, we want to keep the money flowing, maybe even increasing from the boosters while trying to placate the fan base because we know we're going to have an expensive situation with a buyout and we know we're going to need the money to get new kids anyway, no matter who we hire in NIL. The third, and this might be the most damning, they don't really know what the plan is. They may have like PR people in their ear chirping certain things, but they're just kind of making this up as they go along, trying to do what they can do to quell the fire week by week. There has been more statements of confidence regarding Luke Fickell from McIntosh and the Chancellor in the last 2 weeks than Wisconsin has touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. To give you perspective on just how brutal this is, those are kind of my three spinning plates in the sky, Rowan. Which, if any, do you think is the most likely and why?
Yeah. I don't know that you can say right now your first one, which you believed was the least likely, where Wisconsin believes that this is the best course of action because they believe that infusing more money is going to make them work next year. I don't believe that that is the case. And I think that Chris McIntosh kind of alludes to it because in this statement, he said that he doesn't, not that he doesn't expect, but if you look at the line that he talks about, he says the results of this elevated support may not be immediate, but we are confident that the impact will be positive and long term. So he is also alluding to the investment from next year not potentially resulting in immediate success, which means you might have another down year next year on top of the success or the struggles that you've seen for the first 3 years right now of the Fickle era. So I don't think that they are seeing this as this is going to be an immediate fix. We believe that this is the best path for success and bringing reuniting the fan base and things like that because right now you aren't in a path of success for 2026 and the athletic director kind of acknowledged that in his own personal statement. I think that what the Badgers though think right now is that they do have a plan and the plan right now is one of twofold. It's one, hedging things while also trying to find a way to move forward and understanding this isn't the status quo. The biggest, part about the Luke Fickell conversation has been his buyout. A lot of reports have been out there circulating that it's around $25 million to let go of Luke Fickell at the end of this season. That is a significant buyout. Now, we have also seen teams go past that, specifically Penn State, who just paid James Franklin $50 million to not coach for them. Now, do I believe that that was the right move for that program? That's probably a topic for another conversation. But we also have now seen Billy Napier be fired from Florida, a move many anticipated and one that has a buyout of around $20 million. But we've also seen other coaches such as Florida State and Mike Norvell, where the athletic director has also backed the coach at least throughout the end of the 2025 season. So you've seen different programs around the league or around college football go in different ways. I think right now, I don't know if Wisconsin's athletic department believes Luke Fickell is the answer, but I also think that they feel they'd be in a worse situation if they were to fire Luke Fickell and have to pay that buyout. Because the argument right here is investing more in the football program and not firing Luke Fickell allows you to invest more into the roster and into your coaching staff, which you believe can put you on the best track for success in the future. I think that that is the plan Wisconsin has. Now, whether that's a good plan or not, based on what we've seen in the last 3 years and how they've invested so far and how they've kind of struggled to recoup on their investment so far, that's where the question is, what is going to change? Because right now, there hasn't been any evidence that things will change based on the status quo.
Right, right. So getting back to my kind of throwing good money after bad, the sunk cost fallacy. So I'm just trying to unwind the logic behind what McIntosh is probably getting at. I do agree. I think that's probably what they're thinking. So you have someone who has been here for 3 years and maybe hasn't had quite as much money as they want to do the things, but there are any number of other red flags, position group by position group, coaching staff, players, development, that even if the money had been a little higher, unless you're thinking you're going to get like the 10 best players in the portal, you still have significant evidence of poor coaching, poor development, poor planning. And so the idea where we're just going to throw a little more money at that problem, or maybe a lot more money, I don't know what the thing is seems illogical to me just simply based on results. Secondly, what I think this misses, and I'm going to say the word, it's the B word, boosters. You're going to have boosters that are so angry about this. I mean, and I've spoken to a couple. I'm not some big sourcing guy, but I do know enough about major boosters who I've talked to who are apoplectic about Fickell potentially continuing to be the coach. And this is real money. Okay, that has to be a canary in the coal mine as far as what the rest of them are like. So you have this situation where you all this additional money. We're going to do this with this money. Where's that money coming from? It's not going to be coming from the stands. We're going to have 45,000 people at the Washington game, maybe. The Illinois game, similar. So you're going to have a bunch of fans going dressed as metal seats at a Wisconsin game. Renewals for the 2026 season tickets are going to be, depending on what happens, but if they stick with Fickell, I can tell you this with a fair amount of confidence, they're going to be way down. And the NIL crew you have lined up, they're not going to want to put more money. Where's this money coming from? This is the biggest problem I have with this logically. No matter what you think about Fickell or his potential to turn it around, this doesn't the checks and balances and ones and zeros and dollar signs do not add up here for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. But I will say this: I know you say you've said you've spoken to a couple of people, and I absolutely believe that certain boosters are probably questioning this decision. But I also think that this statement doesn't come out this publicly without that plan already in place. I do think Wisconsin has the resources already in place to implement the plan. Now it's up to, once they get to the offseason or closer to that, to start executing the plan with certain benchmarks, or where exactly will they what will they do with the current coaching staff, what will they do when it comes to roster construction, where are they going to target. Those questions are still to be determined, but I do believe that they have that plan in place. Now I think the one caveat when it comes to all of this is the last part that you mentioned, which is fan turnout. Right, we've already seen that start to decline over the last few weeks. You see, especially as fans start to leave the stadium by halftime or the third quarter. That could be the one caveat in all of this, because if retention sales decline, if you see less fans coming to games, that might be the main statement being put out there, that obviously they aren't happy with the status quo and they aren't happy with their head coach. And we've already started to see that a little bit. That might be the one caveat. But as for the plan for where this money might start to come from, I do believe Wisconsin already has that in place. Otherwise, a statement of this magnitude, this publicly, wouldn't be put out.
Okay, that's good insight, Ron. And you've talked to people maybe that I've not, and I'm not claiming to have my finger on the pulse of every booster. It is logical to think that might be what they're thinking, but then flip it right around. Then, if you have the resources in place to have this kind of situation going on, it takes a little bit away from your argument that you don't have the buyout money. It's kind of like, it's not. I'm not saying they're equal. I'm just saying that it you can get the money. You can get a lot of people jazzed up and enthused about a new coach potentially. You're going to get boosters who otherwise would be running the other direction, going, "Okay, I'm listening now." And part of that plan could be the same things we're talking about here: more money into the roster. You could do all of those things with a new coach, not one who's had 3 years and has had a track record that it has gone down in every year. Now we're sitting in the basement with a mining pick trying to see how far down we can go this season. The whole thing is just, and that's why I said when I gave the three options, the part where it certainly an interpretation is they're kind of making this up almost in triage mode as they go along. That may not be what you're hearing. but it is a little bit how it plays to me. It plays to me. I'm not saying there's not meetings and there's not, resources going into PR. I think all of that is happening, but it's coming off to me a little amateurish, in my opinion. And yes, they are completely taken aback by this. I don't think Chris McIntosh went into the season thinking Wisconsin was going to have 2 wins at this point and was going to have 2 touchdowns in the last 4 games in October. I just think this is all kind of taking everyone by surprise, but it's how you deal with it on the run. And this is just my 2 cents, but as someone who spends a lot of time kind of gauging the fan base, and frankly, by the way, I've been known as like overly optimistic and about the football program. I'm just in basketball too. So to get me to this point says something. But I don't, as I mentioned a few moments ago, this kind of flaccid statement that leaves a little bit of generality, says nothing about Luke Fickell's the guy for sure. That's, of course, probably smart to do it that way in that sense. This isn't making one Wisconsin fan feel better. I'm just telling you, this is, I know you said it may not be for the Wisconsin fans. I don't think it's going to be a general booster. I don't think it's going to make them feel better either. Maybe they have some super deep pocket. Maybe Mr. Culver is in the fold now or something. Maybe they got the billionaire that went to Wisconsin who does AI. Maybe they have him. But if you have them, you can afford to buy out Fickell. So you see what I'm saying?
And again, it's fair. And the one thing that I will say, we have seen in this college football era, hell, with our own program in 2022, with multiple different changes, with first firing Paul Christ and then also not going ahead with Jim Leonhard, that things can change. Things change a lot over the course of a season. We have seen that quite a bit in college football, which is why I am both intrigued and surprised by the statement a little bit, although you start to see it unravel a little bit this weekend because you know how much things can change. And I think right now you are right. This is kind of a move to quell the fan base a little bit. I don't know. It's to quell the fan base, but also to quell the players because you have a team right now, or at least in the last few weeks, with so many reports coming out that are questioning. Right? They probably are questioning behind the scenes. Hell, Luke Fickell said it himself. I mean, it's hard not to think about it at times. Obviously, that's not the main focus of the team or the players, but this at least puts to bed those questions, however you might want to interpret that, and tells the players who exactly they're going to play for. Now, is that a positive thing or a negative thing? We will see based off of this offseason whether players choose to leave via the transfer portal or not, or, if they choose to return and play for Luke Fickell, you will see kind of who is bought into Luke Fickell and who is not. And so that response we have yet to see. But right now, I mean, as a fan, I can understand where you're coming from. I can understand where they've been coming from for the last few weeks because, like you said, McIntosh didn't, but nobody expected Wisconsin to be this bad. And it's one thing to be 2-5. It's another thing to be 2-5 and not be competitive in your last 5 games. Wisconsin's lost by 14 plus in each game, and it really felt like they didn't have a chance in maybe every game but the Michigan game, which also went away from them in that third quarter. Their offense right now, I believe, ranks 133rd in the country in scoring. Like, that
This is the
is
worst.
abysmal.
Yeah,
It's
this
one of
is
the
the
worst
worst
in college
team.
football.
This
And
is the worst team in Power Four, Rowan. And let me tell you something. You know what this is? This any sort of approval of Fickell keeping him for longer. This is a police officer pulling over a drunk driver who blows a .3 and giving him a cup of coffee and sending him back out on the road. I don't know what to tell you, man. It's the thought that throwing a little more money at the problem when you have players, captains, Allegro, I believe it was after the Iowa game, we do not have an identity. If you do not have an identity after 3 years coaching this team, you are not going to have an identity with $30 million more dollars. It's never going to happen with a little bit better coaching. I've talked about this. Yes, they have sub Big Ten average or standard coaching at several position groups. If it were better, the team would probably be better. But that I don't think that's even the problem right now. I think it's the buy-in as much as anything.
right.
And look, Luke Fickell, he's running on fumes now as far as what he's accomplished in his life. I understand the playoff and being the coach of the year. If this team had Mike Dembrock as its offensive coordinator and Freeman as its defensive coordinator, we wouldn't be 2-5 right now. But that was a miraculous, incredible alignment when Fickell had those guys at Cincinnati, who are, of course, now at Notre Dame as OC and coach. Um, it's a different standard. But I think, and this is again talking to people who know more about football than I do. Wisconsin has sub replacement level coaches at several positions. Offensive line, certainly one. In the defensive back room, other ones. And I don't need to get more personal than that, but I upgrading coaches and having more money to get better guys on campus is fine, but I just haven't seen enough in 3 years. I don't think I'm speaking alone here. I'm probably onto something. And when I say probably, I mean I certainly am. Where there's no reason to think it's going to change with Fickell. There's just no reason
And
to think it will.
and that's a very fair statement. I think, again, trying to find a way to put the logic behind all of the thinking. I think the way that they are thinking right now is Wisconsin has seen several other programs with an infusion of money in their football program rise to national relevance. But not only that, compete in that college football championship kind of era. I think they were a little late in the NIL era, but I also think that they've struck out a lot in the NIL era when it comes to targets, be it development with high school recruiting at times or in the transfer portal. And you mentioned the coaching staff. Development falls on the coaching staff, and that could be a question. But I also think it is roster related. And when you had roster related issues in year one, that's a difference. But when you feel like you have personnel related issues heading into year three, when you've had, opportunities via the transfer portal, opportunities via your freshman classes to build this roster, that is a huge concern. Now I think it's one last ditch effort where we're going to give you the money. You've got to go out and get some big names next year, and you've got to find a way to transform this roster because we have a tough schedule. And if we don't see any progress, or if we really, it's mainly, you want to see a much higher standard of competitiveness, then we know that even with resources, you aren't the guy. It softens the blow for us next year financially because it is easier to make a move deeper into Luke Fickell's contract. And then you have a reset with the understanding that you probably will have to continue that level of investment. Right now, though, it is hard to say. Winning changes everything. Winning will absolutely change everything. But like you're mentioning, right now, it's hard to say how Wisconsin gets back to winning ways under the current regime when we haven't seen much change. We haven't seen much development. We haven't seen many players play better than expected under Luke Fickell. And if so, we don't know how much you can attribute that to this coaching staff at the moment. So you should expect to see wholesale changes at this point in the or at later in this offseason, and both the coaching and the roster aspect. And we'll see really whether that really makes a difference.
Well, that's all well said, Rowan, and certainly when you're going to be looking up at Camp Randall and you're going to see it half full with an empty student section against Washington or against Illinois, which should be an incredible rivalry game, certainly was coming into the season. You can sit up in your ivory towers there up in Madison, Chancellor or Mac, and you can do all these X's and O's and business plans and focus groups. But the reality is, if you've lost the fans, it's almost impossible to get them back. I'm telling you. And it's not impossible, like you say, winning solves everything. But there is no data point with this current staff and this guy, Fickell, leading it, that would lead any reasonable, rational person to believe that that is going to happen, even with more money. They've also struck out with the portal. I'm going to say 3 consecutive years. Yes, there are some solid defensive linemen that have been solid Big Ten players. Reiger obviously is a really, really good player, but there's not just not there. I'm going to wrap it up because I think we all have stuff to do today. I really appreciate you jumping on, but where I am is all this literally, if you took McIntosh's letter and printed it out for an old-fashioned printer, you're a young guy, everything's digital now. And you could use it to throw it on the fire because that's really all this is. And if I'm a player on this team or a parent of a potential recruit, this doesn't do a whole lot to make me feel better. So you have the locker room, it's not going to do that much for. You have the fan base, it's enraging. And I almost said it's better just to almost have like vague, basic cookie cutter statements at this point rather than this kind of stuff, because this is almost like worse in a way. Like detail almost makes it worse because the detail isn't Luke Fickell leaving. But anyway, I am where I am. You are where you are, and I think maybe you're seeing this a little bit from a slightly different angle than I am, and that's healthy. But I have grave concerns about how this is going to look, and I still expect Luke Fickell to be fired by December. So that's where I am.
We'll see. And yeah, as I said, anything can change from now until then, even with statements. So we're in for, I don't know if it'll be a fun ride, but we're in for a long ride up until December for sure.
It's going to be a long ride. Let's do it by a show of hands. Do we think, not you and me, this is the audience. We have an audience today. Cheer if you think Luke Fickell should be retained. Okay. Cheer if you think Luke Fickell should be fired. Okay. Yeah. Well, when you use a free program, that's the caliber of sound effects you get. Anyway, Ron, thanks a lot. Have a great day. Really appreciate you coming on. And boy, hope we have, if nothing else, we have some clarity going forward, because this has been about the least fun 3 or 4 weeks of being a Wisconsin football fan as I can remember since the late 80s. I know you were not quite in existence at that point, but I can tell you it was bad. This feels like a little Morton-esque. Morton with a much more talented team. It almost makes it worse.
Yeah.
Well said.